Ask him who's going first.
Waiting time.
Okay, welcome folks. If you are here for a conversation with artists from Beyond the World's End, you're in the right place. We're just waiting for a few more folks to arrive and we'll get started in just a few minutes. And by few minutes, I mean like a minute. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Good morning, if you're on Pacific Coast time. My name is Whitney and I am an exhibitions catalyst at the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. We had the immense pleasure of working with TJ and this whole slate of artists on the exhibition Beyond the World's End, which surprisingly timed was opened only a week before the shelter-in-place orders were put into effect here in California. So if you've gotten a chance to see the exhibition, wonderful. If you haven't gotten a chance to see the exhibition, we will be extending the dates of this exhibition. And we plan to be able to have some kind of access safely sometime later this summer and early this fall. I'm gonna go ahead and put in the chat here a link to the exhibition website where you'll be able to find more information about the works on view, links to some works from the individual artists in the exhibition who will be speaking today. If you have any questions at any time throughout this conversation, I would encourage you to go ahead and use the chat function in this group meeting. I'll go ahead and be collecting those questions and we'll have a Q&A at the end of today's conversation. And that will be moderated by TJ and myself after all of the artists have had an opportunity to share a little bit about their work. We are asking that folks keep their microphones muted throughout the conversation today. And we will have, again, as I mentioned, that opportunity for more Q&A toward the end of our conversation. So without any other ado, I'm going to go ahead and shoot it on over to TJ Demos, who was the curator for this exhibition, who will talk a little bit more about our program today. Take it away, TJ.
Thanks so much, Whitney, and welcome everyone. It's great that we're able to do this. I hope everyone and their families and loved ones and kin are doing well in these pandemic times. What a catastrophe and nightmare it is. So I'm sorry it can't be in person and that this the pandemic looks like it's going to be going on for a while more. So I thought I'd say a few words about the project before we open it up and hear from participating artists, and then we'll have a group discussion after that. So Beyond the World's End for me is a large research project that I initiated a few years ago, and it's part of a research project, exhibition project, and a screening series and keynote speaker series at University of California, Santa Cruz, where I teach. And it's dedicated to the question of how to get beyond the dystopian negativity of the present and its all-consuming, debilitating nature. How can we, in other words, think about different kinds of futures that get us beyond the kind of capitalist catastrophism that has only been magnified with the present crisis. So we know, if you know, from a lot of pop cultural sources, Hollywood film, fiction, sci-fi, theoretical approaches, we know that that dystopia is all around us, and there's many ways to think about the world's end, or different worlds, different endings. But less asked is the question of how can we imagine emancipatory futures, futures of social justice, futures founded on multi-species flourishing. So that's broadly the framework of the conceptual project that I initiated. This is excuse me. This is also a book project for me, and I'm just completing a text. I'd like to just read the the opening paragraph from this book. Sorry, excuse me. So this is from a forthcoming book called Beyond the World's End, The Arts of Living at the Crossing. And the first paragraph is this: we're entering the end game, the terminal point of democracy, of liberalism, of capitalism, of a cool planet, of the Anthropocene, of the world as we know it. Catastrophic environmental breakdown, global pandemic, neo-colonial extractivism, algorithmic governance, disaster and racial capitalism, anti-migration populism, and endless war comprise some of the forces structuring this conjuncture. Given this socio-ecological crisis, informed by past colonial genocides, ongoing corporate ecocides, and transatlantic slavery, how do we conceptualize the aftermath? What of the many worlds that have already ended? Equally urgent, how do we represent the radical potentiality of the not yet? How do we cultivate and bring into being emancipated futures? Addressing this urgent, multifarious, and world historical subject, this book, and also by extension, this exhibition and this discussion, centers interlinked socio-political, economic, and environmental crises, a copious and rousing intersection capable of motivating and engaging interdisciplinary comparative research and civic attention alike. Doing so, it focuses specifically on models of aesthetic practice, where life is being reinvented in ways that not only critically identify the manifold problems that threaten existence as we know it, they also offer diverse approaches to a hopeful futurity, where hope joins speculative imagination to the material practice of living otherwise, capable of carrying us beyond the end of the world. That's from my forthcoming book, Beyond the World's End, that clearly relates to the exhibition. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation with participating artists. Laurie Palmer, Amy Balkin is with us, Krista Franklin, members of Super Futures Haunt Collective, the Rasquache Collective, and Newton Harrison. So we're going to hear from each of them in roughly 3 to 5 minute presentations where they'll discuss their work and also situate it hopefully in relationship to the exhibition's larger conceptual framework. And then we'll move on to have a group discussion where we'll also be integrating audience questions that you can write in the chat window on Zoom. So welcome everyone, and why don't we begin? We had I think I believe Laurie is the first to present. So welcome, Laurie.
Thanks, TJ, and thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this exhibition, and also Whitney for your incredible persistence in the face of enormous obstacles to continue it. I also wanted to thank people who were involved with making my piece. Glenn Allers of Soliculture, who donated the pink fiber optic material that the solar pipeline is made out of. Sophie Lev for hours of help drawing the photosynthetic diatoms. Cliff Friedlander for his amazing craftsmanship for the table, which is a little piece of Hannah Arendt's table. Justin and the rest of the installation crew at the MA, who are really helpful in setting this thing up, the Santa Cruz DSA, who continued to help me imagine and think beyond the end of the world. So I realize that many of you may not have seen the work, so I should probably show you some pieces, but I just want to give you a few things to think about first. One is just the irony that we're meeting on Zoom, because part of this piece is conceived around a famous quote by the philosopher Hannah Arendt from 60 years ago, when she conceived of the public sphere as a place, as a table that both connects people and also separates people. And then she says, which some of you may know this, the weirdness of the situation when the public sphere is lost resembles a spiritualistic seance, where a number of people gathered around a table might suddenly, through some magic trick, see the table vanish from their midst. And I just think of Zoom as this total lack of anything that either connects or separates us. And the irony of meeting this way now is really intense for me. So this project, which I guess I can share my screen now, it's going to first look like Zoom. Let's see. Is basically, this is a full shot of it. The Ma allowed me to, they opened up a skylight in this gallery so that this pipeline goes all the way up and is connected to the outside light. And then this other image is a close-up of some of the drawings into this fiber optic material of photosynthetic diatoms. So the project brings together 3 different kinds of time that I've been thinking about. The time of oil, its photosynthetic origins, and the linking of living and non-living matter, and its relationship to both the Capitalocene and the climate crisis. The time of the sun, its immediacy and its long-termness, and its direct energy, and the potential for communicative, non-verbal exchange between beings and things, responding to sun energetically, electrically, through pigments in our eyes, in the flowers, in the leaves, in minerals, and in things. It's also about the time of commoning and uncommoning. And on the table, that piece of table, is a quote from Edouard Glissant and reappropriated or reused by Frederick Moten, consent not to be a single being. And this is thinking about how we are already connected, which of course the pandemic is making evident, if it wasn't already, through our material thingness with each other, with other species, and also everything in the world, subject to the flux of matter and the one-way and indeterminate nature of time, but we're differently positioned, differently privileged, and differently protected in and from the savagery of capitalism, racism, and a hierarchical humanism that not only subjects plants and animals to the status of resource supply or waste material, but also other humans. So Hannah Arendt's table doesn't acknowledge that humans are only a piece of this larger conversation that we want to be having, this larger coming together in a way that both acknowledges our separatenesses, our differences, and also looks for common ground. I meant this piece initially to be a lightning rod for public conversations that would take place while the exhibition was up. And this is, I guess, one of them, but it also will connect to an ongoing project with comrades in the Eco-Socialist Working Group of the DSA. We're planning a People's Tribunal to put private property on trial. And that is still planning to happen in July. It's an ongoing project and has been in the works through a number of other projects I could talk about. But the last thing I want to say about, I guess about this piece is it also includes a speculative timeline, as well as the drawings of the diatoms. And one of the pieces in the timeline talks about a date in 2020 when oil workers would walk off the job and join the general strike. And I just wanted to say this week, the UC system disinvested in fossil fuels in the wake of a massive drop in stock prices of oil. So they took advantage of the economic situation to take a moral high ground that they weren't willing to take before. But it's one of the ironies of the pandemic that's going on now in terms of the ways in which, for instance, the incredibly brave strike and actions for a cola campaign that our UCSC grad students have been doing, how prescient that was to the kinds of shutdowns that are starting to happen locally and around the world. So that's plenty of time. I'll stop now, and I look forward to what everybody else has to say. Stop share.
Thanks, Laurie. Next up is Amy Balkin. Welcome, Amy.
And the work in the exhibition is an archive, a people's archive of sinking and melting. You know, it's funny because storage is a really important question. And so in some ways, it being at the museum, whether it's open or closed, provides a kind of support for it that I can't necessarily offer it when it's not circulating. So this kind of preservation opportunity is something that's, I think, you know, again, a contradiction of the context of COVID. But I'm going to try to show a few slides, and I'm going to introduce the archive through reading about it while I show some slides, just because I think that's the best way to sort of speak in the short amount of time that I have. So I'm just going to switch very quickly over to screen share and go view, enter full screen. And don't think it's working. Hang on a moment here. Sorry. Okay, is this working? Okay, so a People's Archive of Sinking and Melting, it's a project that I began, and now you could consider me a co-registrar. The project is attributed to Amy Balkin et al. And others because as an archive created fully of contributions from places that may or may not disappear owing to climate change and its geopolitics, it wouldn't exist without these co-author contributors. So that is how the work is framed. The archive itself is a collection of items contributed from places that may disappear owing to the combined physical, political, and economic impacts of climate change, including glacial melting, sea level rise, coastal erosion, and desertification. Through what I describe as common but differentiated collections using language from the UNFCCC reports and conferences, contributed materials form an archive of the future anterior or what will have been. And I think this is where the archive is meant to think about the kind of destable times we live in, the kind of branching futures that are still possible based on the kind of political trajectories that may or may not be taken and the scenarios that play out. The materials in the archive are intended to mark this asymmetry, especially of present or anticipated loss, standing in for contributors' recognitions of the production of precarity and slow, and I would also say acute dispossession. Together, they form one material document among many, a collection of community gathered evidence, a public record, and a midden, or a kind of archaeological trash dump. The archive operates from the principle that anything is equally valuable as a record of present or projected future disappearance as chosen by someone who is there. It doesn't have to originate from that location. It can be anything that happens to be there, including detritus or flotsam or jetsam. And with respect to the imaginative effort of the contributors to acknowledge present loss and to look forwards towards a troubled future with foresight, the contributed items are presented as common but differentiated collections. To this end, currently objects in the archive are presented as a common grouping of materials, but differentiated in collections organized by nation and labeled for exhibition within the United Nations Framework Climate Convention Annex Party groupings from where the contribution is sent, which is shown on the label for each item. Antarctica, from which the archive also houses materials, has no status in these negotiations. The labeling, which organizes this version of the documentation of the archive, is intended to call attention to the gap between the stated commitments, uneven resources for climate change adaptation and mitigation, and the unequal power and vested interest of wealthy nations exercised in climate negotiations, and those nations like Bangladesh and many small island nations, among many others, likely to subject to permanent loss and damage. The differentiation is also intended to help viewers interpret the geographic distribution of the materials in the archive, which does not map evenly onto the risk of disappearance, and to reflect on the resources required to contribute to the archive, including a connection to English language speaking arts infrastructure, to the web, and to freight networks. To this date, the archive has circulated exclusively in Annex I countries. Based on the principle of fairness in the context of relative loss and damage associated with climate change impacts, the ongoing work of political framing and editing will continue to determine how contributions are presented in research and exhibition contexts. And I'll conclude shortly. Does the archive contain a future record of political failure to act against climate change as evidenced by materials from places that will have disappeared? Or does it record a period before the actions to reduce emissions to avoid further climate destabilization and its attended, quote, economic and non-economic losses were taken? Taking from the French future anterior, but using the English future perfect, it marks current climate politics and nascent climate political resistances as viewed from the vantage of an audience of a non-specific future time and place. For contributors, the framework of the future anterior is intended to support a specific perspective. Will where I live be habitable in the future, and what is my political connection to that? The task and form of the archive also assumes a future with the climatic and social stability and the resources, including a place to house it with stable enough conditions to maintain it, and a future audience and a scenario that will support both. As an archive of the future anterior intended for the present, the archive is open for submissions, seeks sites for presentations in non-Annex I countries, and a permanent home. Who should contribute? Given the unequal distribution of impacts, varied timescales, and the personalized dangers of future and present climate and its politics? Anyone who lives in a disappearing place. And I will stop screen sharing, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for that. Lots to think about, and also connections between, I think, Laurie's project of commoning and yours in terms of a kind of radical democratization of archives. So lots to talk about. Next up, we have Krista Franklin. Hi, Krista.
Hi, how are you, TJ?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much to you and Whitney for inviting me to be a part of this symposium. And just to be present for this conversation, it's really enriching on this Friday, and just to connect with you all face to face, because we've been having a lot of back and forth engagements, but not really face to face. So it's lovely to see everybody. And thank you to everybody for coming. I have some friends in the room that I noticed. So thank you for those who know me personally for showing up this afternoon. I appreciate it. Or morning, some of you guys this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that TJ pulled into this exhibition. Thank you so much. It's an old project called Seed, the Book of Eve. It's an artist book that I created in honor and homage of Octavia Butler, who is a phenomenal science fiction novelist. More than that to me, though, right? That's a very kind of reductive way of describing her work. But I feel like she was a seer. I feel like she was a visionary in a lot of ways. And she was prescient. So she saw this moment, well before this moment arrived in multiple iterations in her novels. So, you know, in order to kind of survive these moments, and please forgive the background noise in my place, in order to survive these moments, right, we can look to her work as a manual for survival, or as manuals for survival. The major thing, I think, and the major takeaway is adaptation, right? How do we adapt? How do we continue to evolve, you know? I'm gonna talk a bit about Seed and show you some images from that project. And then I'm gonna slide on out of here. Let me see if I can share this screen. I've never done that before. Can you all see it? Okay. So I'm gonna start with this slide, which is a cover of you know, a very famous book of Octavia Butler. It's actually, I won't say that, it's kind of one of her lesser known, but it's pretty significant at this time, Clay's Arc. So I would really recommend you guys checking that out. So Seed, the Book of Eve. So let me read this statement. After the untimely and shocking passing of Miss Butler in 2006, I determined to create an artist book of mixed media collage illustrations for each of her novels. The project was a direct response to my ongoing frustration of never seeing her work adapted in film. In the spirit of my other Black woman writer guru, Toni Morrison, I determined I wasn't going to get a cinematic adaptation. If I wasn't going to get that, I should make the work I wanted to see. Since film and video are not my medium, I turned to collage to create the visual representations that plagued my imagination after years of reading and loving Miss Butler's works. I titled the project Seed, the Book of Eve, a reference to Wild Seed, one of her other novels, which was the first novel of hers I read, and to Lilith, the primary character in the Xenogenesis trilogy. I worked on one book image at a time, selecting passages or occurrences in the novels that most resonated with me, or overall themes that were addressed in the novels. I was also conscientious about creating images wherein Black women were centered, since all of Miss Butler's novels have Black women at the focal point of the narratives. I also sought to expand the idea of the page. Many of the collages of Seed, the Book of Eve, expand outside of or beyond the borders of the page, causing each page panel to run over into the next one. In 2007, I was awarded a small grant from the city of Chicago to continue working on the book, and I showed prints of the pages at an exhibition years ago, co-curated with a friend, Emily Evans, that served as the final culmination of the project. Seed, the Book of Eve has gone through other iterations over the past several years, including one I created for an exhibition with artist and scholar Dijananga Akpem here in Chicago, and I developed years ago for Women's Artists Month at Chicago Public Library South Shore Branch in honor of Miss Butler's legacy. I transformed a science book titled Children of the Stars into an altered book, intervening the collages from Seed, the Book of Eve, into the pages. So what you see essentially in Beyond the World's End are prints of the original pages from the book. I think there are 5, if I'm not mistaken, that were selected, that the curators selected for this show. So yeah, that's Seed, the Book of Eve right there. And its impact on me has been tremendous over the past several years. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Krista. It's, I think, so crucial to bring Octavia Butler into this. As you say, she's so incredibly prescient for what's happening today, and she saw this coming decades ago, which says a lot about you know, different receptions of end of worldism. What we're considering now is by no means the first and probably not the last either. So Thank you again for that. And let's move on to Futures Haunt Collective. I think I see Chris and Angie. I'm not sure who's going to speak, or both of you, but over to you. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Oh, okay, now I'm talking. Yeah, hi, I'm Angie, also known as Lady How is my avatar in Super Futures, and this is C. And Agent O is her avatar, and unfortunately today, F. Sam Jung couldn't be with us because he's working in New York City, he's a busy man, and his avatar is SFAOW. So yeah, we are really happy to be here and to be a part of this show. The work that we contributed, Ree's going to share some slides. We're originally a part of a show, Afterlife, What Remains, which this is the picture of the show at the Alice Gallery. It was curated by Thea Kire-Tagle. And I believe that it was through Thea that TJ heard about our work, and we were asked to contribute to the current MA show. So what you see up on the wall there are two of the pieces that we contributed. The one is Cape Kiwanda, where the two avatars are on the beach, and the rock or time machine is in the background, and they're arrivants. And the other piece is this visitation. It's actually a piece that we wrote and then performed, and so you can listen to the piece on the audio with the headphones, and it also comes with a takeaway. You get a little postcard when you come to visit the gallery, which of course you can't, and the postcard has the script on the back too, so you can follow along. And our idea about this work, the avatars that we inhabit as a collective are ghosts. I mean, to put it, and whatever that means to you. And they arrive here from the specularity. And so when we're manifesting here, we are doing a visitation, is what we call it. Or, yeah, so whenever we get together and meet and take pictures and create art, that's a visitation. I was thinking a lot about the location is so important to the work. And Seattle is so interesting because I'm from Portland, and that's where I am right now. And I'm Modoc and Klamath, and those are tribes that are located in Southern Oregon, originally a border of California. But I grew up here, I was born here. And what the two locations have in common in part, and what I have in common with those places, is that we were forcibly removed. There was a Modoc War in 1873. Shout out to my buddy Kyle here, because he's aware of this. He grew up in that area, and when the war was over, we lost. Meaning the Modocs. The Modocs were forced into Oklahoma, and were not allowed back into the state of Oregon for a long time, until allotment in the early 20th century. And I'm sorry for the history lesson, but it kind of matters because one of my ancestors, Fanny Ball, remained behind, and she stayed with the Klamath, and she lied about who she was until she was on her deathbed. And then we have Kiki Soblu, or Princess Angeline, who also remained behind when the Duwamish were forced out of Seattle. And so we imagined a meeting of two aunties, and located in different places, but with similar histories. And we also gave her a mask because we are collaborating with her. And in our research about this postcard, it's maybe the first picture Edward Curtis took when he started his ethnohistory, ethnohistorical work. And but some pictures of her eyes are drawn open. And so this has been, I guess what I'm saying, this has been manipulated with before. And so what we did was give her an option of refusal. And also recognizing her ghostly presence, actually, I guess for me, I think it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. I don't want to try to nail it down, but it was a way of calling her family, I think. And so this work that we did together, at the Alice Gallery, we were given the option of performing. And so we did perform with the audio for an audience. And that is another picture. And the reason why we kept it in a slideshow, it's called Watches Over Us, and it's based on a painting my mom did of her family. And then my mom and dad are actually in that picture, and other family members of all of the collective. We do tend to collaborate. And I know that TJ asked a question about radical methodologies, and I do think that being collaborative, particularly coming from academic environments, I'm currently a public school administrator, but I have a doctorate. I went to grad school, and guilty. You're not encouraged to collaborate necessarily. You're not supposed to share your ideas, right? You're supposed to guard them all very, very closely. And I think that being an artist and working together, even speculatively, is a more radical way to think about, I guess, ideas and what it means to be creative and to create. I love that it's not like this is that what we care about is being in good relationship, which is also very native for me. And Sam and Ree are not indigenous to the U.S., but we all share histories of violence, fascination with hauntings and ghosts, and a belief that loving each other and saying yes to each other matters and helps us to matter. This is the piece that's at the Ma in the show, Cape Kiwanda, and it's very different standing in front of it. I think the quality of the paper is very matte. I was really fascinated by the colors. It's very different than looking at it on a screen. I think it's spooky. And this is a picture of a performance that we did at the Alice. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Our art collective is, the three of us, but we do recruit, and we are very queer. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angie, for that overview and presentation, very thoughtful presentation of your work. Thanks again. We'll move now to Rasquache Collective, and then we have Newton Harris, and then we'll open it up for a group discussion. So over to Rasquache Collective.
All right, thank you, TJ. This is Federico Cuatlacuat speaking. I wanted to first of all thank you all for being here. Thank you to the Museum of Art and History in Santa Cruz and TJ for making this possible. It's been a great pleasure to be a part of this exhibition and this conversation. As part of this exhibition, 4 artists participated in this installation of the Rasquache Collective, and 3 of us will be sort of giving you a brief context on the various components that went into conceptualizing and putting this together. I can start out by giving you some background on where Rasquache comes from, and it comes from, we are referencing a Chicano art movement in the 1960s in California that took this term Rasquache, which is of Mesoamerican origin. The term originally had a negative connotation towards lower class people, people that were uneducated, or in this case of Mexico, to be indigenous or mestizo, as a colonial way to implement racism throughout the history of Mexico. And then we started a residency in 2016 that embodied this very same term, this very same attitude. And so in this project that we installed at the museum, we are continuing to explore what this means for us to work with community, to work as a collective, and to really sort of propel and move forward the spirit of making the most from the least as a Rasquache methodology, as a Rasquache attitude. It allows us to approach the work from a very sort of fierce and rebellious spirit to challenge and constantly redefine what currency means in our community, what poverty means in our current Anthropocene. And so what we've been working with is this kite installation as a way to celebrate culture and tradition as a means of political weapons, right? As a means to have tools at hand as a community to thrive under the pressing realities of mass migration, of a anti-migrant attitude from the current US administration. And so if you haven't seen the installation at the museum, hopefully you get a chance to later this summer, but it is the various kites that we installed at the ceiling in the lobby area. And a lot of the materials we were using resemble this sort of attitude of rasquachismo, of making the most from the least. And so in this case, using tiki torches, using other natural materials to build the kites, as well as thermal blankets, referencing the materials that are given to migrants in detention centers. I think at this point, I'm gonna pass it on to Kyle to give you more context on this installation. Kyle?
Yeah, thank you, Federico. So before I get started, like, this was just such an incredible show in bringing together like so many of the themes that are really important to me, and which have been sort of percolating in some of these conversations, and especially, you know, like Angie mentioned, like bringing together some artists who, you know, a lot of the work in this show resonates so much, and, you know, providing an opportunity for exactly conversations like we're having today to begin and to flourish, I think. So, you know, thank you. It's been amazing to be part of that. I've been, you know, yeah, really excited from the first conversations that TJ started, you know, TJ brought me in on in this. So when I think about this project, I think about it basically as sort of 3 different threads of things coming together. You know, as Federico mentioned, this conceptual orientation around Rasquache and Rasquachismo as a kind of ethos of a kind of decolonial upcycling or reusefulness, which resonates a lot with some community practices that we'll touch on here locally in Santa Cruz with the Hub for Sustainable Living, and then this notion of sort of craft and art practices as themselves being a kind of forms of resistance or revolutionary possibilities. And then this idea of time travel, futurism, and time machines in sort of ways that I think resonate with what Angie and Super Futures Haunt Collective referred to. So specifically with this piece, we were having these conversations, and then we had this opportunity, partially because of this show and partially because of a grant provided by the California Humanities Foundation, to convene a series of workshops at the Hub for Sustainable Living in conjunction with Sanctuary Santa Cruz, Sabrosa Community Space, and the Fabric Arts Collective, where we were. We brought Federico and Karina to sort of lead and participate in some workshops teaching the fabrication of these kites or papalotes, as well as sort of different kinds of semi-traditional Mexican embroidery strategies, which you see embellishing the kites as well. And then as part of that, this ongoing conversation about the use of those materials, the use of that kind of ethos of those materials, which is very much what the Hub has been all about traditionally. The Bike Church and Fabrica, I think, prime examples of that. As those kinds of practices themselves being interventions in capitalist time, right? So that the logic of accumulation, the logic of reproduction, which obtains in capitalist time, is both like upended by and intervened in by the practices and the temporality themselves of this kind of crafting activity, and particularly this kind of collective crafting activity that we were engaged with in these workshops. And then, I think the other aspect of that then is, which I think Anne will touch on more, is the ways that we think about that. Those kinds of activities, those kinds of convenings of workshops as being themselves a kind of time machine. And in some ways less, I think that we think of that somewhat speculatively or as a kind of, science fiction activity, but also in very practical ways in terms of a kind of, a lot of this relationship to time travel and time machines for me comes out of a study of the ways that capitalism and the state deploy, what's called game theory, or sometimes referred to as scenario planning, which is this kind of corporate version of game theory, which is, so basically like really powerful entities, institutions have this capacity, have these plans in place for dealing with crises. Theoretically, apparently, our federal government doesn't have very great capacity for planning these days, but they basically, the powerful entities in the world, have this tradition of anticipating the variety of different kinds of crises that we might confront, and then planning for what they're going to do, so that if then all the algorithms are already sort of worked out. And so from our perspective, from my perspective, a lot of the task of time travel, the task of time machines, is to convene community conversations in which our communities, which have not historically been empowered, are thinking, planning, exactly doing the kinds of pre-work that's necessary to be able to act quickly when crises emerge. And so in that way, I think, this kind of activity, both as a kind of response to state violence, state repression, colonialism, and as anticipating the kinds of crises that we're seeing right now, is very much, that's kind of what we're all about with this. And I think in that, I'll hand it over to Anne for a moment and switch to different slides for a second here.
Hello, everybody, and just to echo what everyone's said already, thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here and be in the company of so many wonderful, thoughtful folks. And so yeah, as Kyle was saying, this project we imagine as a time machine, and in that the craft workshops and the kites themselves are a form of intergenerational and cross-border communication. So it's not only in a practical sense of sharing materials and sharing skills, but also in a science fiction or speculative sense. And the action of making and flying the kites is both an intervention and a ritual across time and space. And this is especially, as Federico touched on, through both the traditional sort of making and playing with kites that that we associate with children, but also the materials, the Mylar emergency blankets are connecting this into the pain and injustice of children in border detention. And the connection also with making the most with the, from the least. And then through the kites themselves, they ask in the exhibition, I'm not sure whose slides those are. Yeah, there we go. In the exhibition itself, the kites are asking questions of the viewer, which are time indeterminate questions, forcing us into the speculative space, asking us to inhabit kind of a simultaneous past and present, as well as imagining futures. And this is bridging individual histories, as well as developing empathy. So I think that this is a not just a time and space machine, but also an empathy machine. So imagining different scenarios, bringing them into imagining our own futures, bringing pasts and presents into our own futures. And that's especially with regards of climate disaster and the present and future disasters and migration that will be coming down the pipe. So yeah, I think that's what I got. Thank you all.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Anne and Federico and Kyle. Last up is Newton Harrison, and I should say I'm not providing extensive introductions for everyone, but you can find these on the MA website and more information about all these projects. And in some cases, the videos are available online, so you can check out the show virtually through the MA website. So over to Newton Harrison.
I don't know if you'll see it on the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean's dying. We talk to one. Oh, let me begin somewhere else. I'm so angry when I hear all you. I take my instructions from the life web, not you and not all the human bullshit around it. 2, my deep learning comes from the washout. Benny the wise man is my teacher, and I his. I take my wisdom from the Tewa. Yes, in New Mexico, from the wise woman. I take my wisdom from others, like the Gabrielino, whose name I can't pronounce, but whose sacred waters our work saved. I do not take my information from you. And I do not take my information from the many little tiny systems you're all working with. The world ocean is dying. What the fuck are you people doing? The atmosphere was once 21%, now 20, and shrinking. Our whole atmosphere, the atmospheric commons is in danger. What the fuck are you people doing? I'm out of here.
Big issues.
Okay. Thanks, Newton. I know that this is, bringing up a lot of powerful emotions, and indeed we are in a crisis, and in fact, a world-threatening event. So I know that there's lots of anger about this, and Newton, you really expressed this in your work as well. I'm wondering if you want to talk. I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit more about your work, though, in the show.
I know work. Can I talk?
Yeah, go ahead.
Work is from is a proposal for this country of Sweden. Presently, I'm working with 4 countries with the basic intention of bringing them through a 6-degree temperature range. What do you have to do in this country to survive? What do you have to do in this country to let the biodiversity emerge again? What do you have to do in this country to let the civilization change? Well, so let me take for Sweden only. It's one of 6. It's probably beyond people's understanding, but we propose in Sweden, since there's plenty of people, there's plenty of space and few people, that the forest, that a 10,000 acre forest be made into an ancient forest. It can be done by working with different kinds of succession. It takes about 150 to 200 years. At the same time, that community we proposed needs about 1,000 acres of farming done by syntropic farming that looks more like ancient forestry than it does look like farming, but that produces as much foam as fucking agribusiness can do. At the same time, it argues for the community to become a herding community where you have polycultural herding, where the act of herding improves the grasslands. And the method of harvesting is exactly the opposite of conventional harvesting. We behave like the wolves. We take the weakest. Only the great profit itself is the overall ecosystem. So on the ground is a $25 million project. So the point is, what can we do to help systems emerge from the crisis of our own generation? And so in the island of Jeju, where near Korea, we have a different kind of proposal. Since it's a volcanic island and the earths are dangerous, you must begin with the biology. You must stop beginning with people. People, 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 people. Enough.
Okay, thanks for that, Newton. I'm wondering if we can move now to a group discussion, and maybe we should address some of Newton's concerns, because I think this is an ongoing debate. People feel obviously really strongly about this. And the debate within current climate politics is centered around the recognition that we're facing basically a massive extinction crisis propelled by the continuation of capitalist industry, what Laurie called the Capitalocene, and it's putting life in jeopardy as we know it. And there's some, I think, like Newton is calling for, who are demanding that we urgently address this situation with meaningful interventions, whether that's in terms of large-scale systems across all sectors to decarbonize immediately, with climate solutions regionally, globally, and scientifically, technologically. And then there's others who are insisting on addressing the crisis through social justice, decolonial, and anti-capitalist methodologies of radical futurity that are insisting that we can't stop thinking about people, as Newton said. And I think Newton is implicating people, other artists in this exhibition, maybe me as well. And before maybe I open it up, I'll just say for myself, speaking of my own position on this, I think it is a really important question. And I just don't personally see any way out of this. I don't think we can have any kind of simple solutionist-based technocratic approach to fixing climate breakdown without also emphasizing and highlighting social justice, forms of democratization, at the same time, or else we dangerously slip into something that could be a kind of eco-fascist solutionism. So I think, I mean, it's really complicated. I'm being a little reductive in magnifying the different positions, but maybe others can share their thoughts on this debate. And I'm wondering if anyone of the group of artists that have already presented on their work has any thoughts or would like to join the conversation at this point.
Sorry about that. Got pissed off.
Amy, you have to unmute yourself, Amy.
Yeah, you know, one thing I've been thinking about, because one of the concerns of the work I've been doing so long is that the question of the commons, whether it's a place where people can't be removed from, or about thinking about how we can share the atmosphere in a survivable way. But I think there are these problems of thinking of, I mean, it's so complex, and you know, I think one of the questions is, you know, how do humans have control over species that can't speak, and you know, these questions of rights of nature, where you don't have, and you have a kind of powerlessness in terms of the hierarchy of beings. And so I've been thinking about the deep seabed and the problems of the seabed as a common heritage, and the claims under common heritage of extraction, and extraction partly in a very minority manner to be a kind of reparations in the context of colonialism, for inequity, for financial inequity. And at the same time, these claims of commons, an extractive commons of the seabed, also is a commons that's destructive to non-humans, sessile beings, seabed dwellers, and their rights, you know, in as much as rights are problematically framed within human terms to their own existence. And so I see these kind of fundamental contradictions just in terms of where priorities are, and also the different kinds of notions of justice. And so I don't have a solution, but but the complexity, whether it's the question of the seabed, the atmosphere, you know, access to healthcare, questions of the foreshore and seabed in New Zealand, and, you know, questions of problems even around tribal rights and justice and land use. So I just want to sort of acknowledge that, and just acknowledge, I mean, acknowledging the complexity isn't that meaningful, but I obviously time limits are very short in terms of, you know, global heating. Time limits are very short in terms of extinction. So so I feel like I hear you, and I think another question is how to support, how do we as artists who are individuals who receive individual support or small group support as collectives, and have large goals, you know, how are you able to fund those, right? And I think to the extent that it's needed. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, Kyle.
Yeah, I guess I think it's worth highlighting some of the historical framing around this if folks aren't already engaged in this debate. You know, I mean, this effectively is a debate that goes back, you know, some hundreds of years in some versions, you know, and I think without being too reductive, you know, like this kind of debate about, you know, Malthusianism and environmental thought continues to be really central to a lot of the work that we're all trying to do as engaged scholars and as community activists. And a real touchstone moment in my own thinking around this is this extractions conference that Laurie and TJ put on a couple of years ago, and you know, Jason Moore came, and a lot of this same discussion about you know, Capitalocene versus Anthropocene, and whether or not, it is people, or certain forms of economic activity and accumulation, and that we really need to be putting the focus on, the critique on, and I guess that without going too far into it, I really feel like Donna Haraway's response to that, as well as the way that she has articulated and speculated about that in the Staying with the Trouble book, as a where her framing of this is that it is it's in familiar ways complex, I guess, but that we need to be thinking about people. But that people, as environmental thought has traditionally framed it, are actually themselves a kind of product of this capitalist moment, of this capitalist trajectory. And so when we're talking about sort of it's really not so much populations in the abstract as the ways in which capitalist growth dictates forms of growth of populations, and that when we can inhabit that kind of complexity and think about these kinds of speculations that transform or end capitalism, we can also see futures that in which our species is not this separate from biology, but very much integrated into those kinds of speculative and really transformative futures.
Yeah, go ahead, Laurie.
Thanks, everybody. I mean, I just wanted to add my perspective too, which is that it's humanism, again going back to Arendt, created, I think, contributed to the history Kyle's talking about, where humans and the rest of the world are separate. And in that world, I understand what Newton is saying, but if it's understood that humanism itself is a problem in how it creates different kinds of humans and creates the potential for the sort of racist dehumanization of huge amounts of the world, then I think understanding how our efforts have to be integrated between changing whatever that idea of what a human is, so that it's connected to this larger world and not separated from it on an equitable horizontal basis. So from my perspective, all of that has to be taken down first, like humanism has to be taken down. And I don't know, Newton, if that's part of what you're talking about, but it feels like that is totally connected to the, well, some of Moten's, language, talking with Saidiya Hartman about the idea of possessing a body is directly connected to the destruction of the earth. So this idea of possession of a self that is a humanist self is totally connected to our destruction of the rest of the world. And I think that it's on that level of connection where I identify with what you're saying, Newton, because I do think that, I'll just stop there.
I think this really connects also to Krista's work, and this was a major motivation for me in wanting to bring her work into the exhibition, because with her work's nod to Octavia Butler and specifically xenogenesis, the idea that we're facing a future in which we have to become different, precisely because of these historical problems with humanism, dehumanization, differential access to humanity, vulnerability, exposure, possessions, all of that. I think Butler's model and the way that I think Krista is laying this out in visual terms is so compelling, so that ultimately, addressing the demands of an emergency climate situation might very well mean that we have to become otherwise fundamentally, ontologically even. Does that make sense? What do you think, Krista?
Yeah, I'm just taking all of this in. I want to first start by saying thank you to Newton, because rage. I'm here for all kinds of it. I just love it. When he went off, I was just like, yeah, this is where we're at, because let's get serious here, right? And let's get urgent, and let's get intense about it, right? So that we can transform. Let's use that rage and that energy to literally transform, right? So yes, I agree with you, TJ. I think that for me, these kind of conversations are both necessary and very challenging for me, right? As an African-American woman who was born and raised in the United States of America, I don't know anything else, okay? And so what I know as far as my history, both personal and political and larger community is concerned, is that the end of the world has happened multiple times. The end of the world, the catastrophic end of the world that everyone is experiencing right now, collectively and globally, that's been happening repetitiously over the centuries to specific people. So I have a hard time with it, because I'm like, the people to look at this point and to bring into this conversation are those individuals who have already survived the apocalypses multiple times. Right? So it's very challenging, again, for me, right, to have this kind of dialogue, because we are all connected. The other thing too is that the very centerpiece of this thing is precisely what's being talked about, what Laurie brought up, what Newton brought up, what everybody really on the panel has brought up in a different kind of way, one way or the other, is that human beings are a part of a larger ecology. Due to, unfortunately, the ways in which many of us have been bred and brought up to believe, we don't have dominion over shit. What you have dominion over is right here and right here. So until we start to really center ourselves around how we are going to integrate ourselves into this larger ecological world and figure out how to be in a symbiotic relationship with it and not just extracting and sucking all of the resources from it and killing off those who have the resources to get them, well, then we're going to be in the same position over and over again. And so we can keep having these conversations. Many of us here on this panel are already involved in this work and have been for many years. And this is why I can hear Newton's frustration and rage, right? Because when you've been putting in this work, he's an elder, this is the elder. When you've been putting in this work for so many years, it's very frustrating to not see any really positive, good returns from that, And so I'm getting hit on the regular with what I think is the most preposterous behavior out of human beings of all time. And I'm constantly hit with it because I time travel. I'm here and I'm also in 1810 at the same time. So I have a hard time figuring it all out and sorting it out. And I do look to people, many of the people who've been named as well. Glissant, thank you so much, Laurie. You know what I mean? A billion Black Anthropocenes, or none right now, is really on my table. I'll put that in the chat box so folks can read it if they choose to. But everybody has to do their own work, and they have to do it where they stand. Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's a huge, large, gigantic issue that we're dealing with here. But it does have some roots. And if folks would trace those roots back, they'll be able to figure out quite clearly where the problem is. I'm going to step off my soapbox real quick because it's almost lunch.
I like your soapbox.
I'm going to step off up at Newton because I'm going to let you take over. You're the expert here. I'm just an artist and a poet out here in the world trying to survive and make it. That's it. You know what I mean? And it's very difficult. It's very challenging for so many people that I love and so many people who I hold dear to my heart and so many communities and collectives of just silos, beautiful silos and nebulas. And I'm just trying to see those people thrive, but so often I see them being hunted down in the streets and murdered like dogs. So it's hard. It's really challenging to consider all of these things. So I'm just really grateful to be in the room. Thank you so much. I see that Echo Art Space posted the title of the book that I mentioned. Thank you for doing that work for me. And thank you all so much again for just having me in this room with you. It's just been very enlightening and enriching. Thank you.
Thanks, Krista. Thanks a lot. And also, I think the Catherine Youssef book, A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, is really an important intervention in the relation between, say, geology and whiteness, and histories of extractivism, and how that correlates with present Anthropocene discourse. I'm wondering what maybe Rhea and Angie want to get in on this and say something about, like, what do you think when you hear Newton say, you know, people, 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 enough with that. We need to get on with other, you know, large-scale thinking about how to fix climate disaster.
Well, I don't think it's up to us necessarily. Like, I'm not a global scientist. I'm a ghost. I'm a teacher. I'm a administrator. I'm a mama. I'm an Indian. And I feel like when you say stuff like that, it makes it seem like we're not embedded in these crazy structures of capitalism. And, you know, yes, like there's always an undercommons, there's always resistance. There's resistance before there's even something to resist. Like, but we're not the people Newton should be yelling at. That's how I feel about it.
And Rhea, do you want to share any thoughts? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I've been, you know, listening and kind of mulling over the kind of scale of what we're all talking about. And, you know, Super Futures, we're working on a project about beavers. And what it reminds me, this conversation reminds me of how beavers have figured throughout history in so many different ways. In the ways that, you know, we sort of projected for a while, beavers were going to save the world, and then beavers were eliminated from the world, and beavers never disappeared. Like right now, they keep infiltrating Camp Pendleton in San Diego, and they're a nuisance now. And, you know, we've been imagining, what if the beavers are kind of recruited to actually so-called save the world, and they actually flood the world, because that to them is actually saving the world. So, you know, this is not going to directly answer maybe the people question, but it did make my mind go into, I wonder what the beavers think about all this.
It does answer the people question. For me, anyway. Because the beavers themselves are global designers.
Yeah, I think they are global designers. There is a way that sometimes they can be romanticized, though.
Exactly.
Like, how can we harness them to save our world, because they are such, you know, they're a utopic sort of natural force. And we're also wondering, well, what if the beavers actually just want to destroy the world, or actually they don't, maybe they won't engineer some sort of safe haven for anyone. So that's kind of where my mind is going during this conversation.
May I answer that biologically, please? All of us, like the prairie grass, doesn't take over California because they're stopped by the Rocky Mountains. So all systems except us have limitations. The beavers, as they continue, will discover their limitations, or the natural systems around them will, you see. So I'm a beaver-friendly guy from day one. And I'd like to personally congratulate you. But that's the kind of thinking we need. Like our global forests, 70% of them are gone. What are we talking about? Little things like, how do we deal with people's non-understanding of this, that, or the other, and therefore how bad capitalism is. The only real capital is the life web's ability to create redundancy. And the redundancy that it creates, that is to say, the overproduction of semen in men even, the overproduction of eggs in women, the overproduction of species, always has a limitation where the overproduction of A is the advantage of B. Those are the things we need to be talking about and looking at and encouraging, and always going back to, well, the human system this, or the human that thing that, or the human this, or the human that. Our attention is in the wrong place. your attention, I must say, is in the right place, at least for me.
One of my prepared questions for the group discussion is this, which I'd like to introduce at this point. And it has to do with a popular demand in current pandemic politics, which is that we can't return to the old normal because it was already broken. So I'd like to open that up. How do you feel? How do the artists in the exhibition feel about this? What should we return to, if anything at all? And how do you relate this demand to your artistic practice? And maybe more broadly, to art in general. Are we witnessing a necessary transformation of artistic practice at this point? How would you articulate that? How do you see the future of art in relationship to the kinds of world transforming crises that we're talking about now? Anne, did you have your hand up?
Question I've heard in years. Thank you.
I did have my hand up a moment ago. It was kind of more relating to the previous thread of conversation, but I could see it also being a bridge into this one. And that is kind of, as somebody, I think a lot about big systems, and I think a lot about deep time. And I also am, inhabiting a human body, and I struggle with the incompatibility of those, and on an intellectual level, but also an emotional level. And for me, in order to continue on, I have to be able to work with microcosms and macrocosms, or else the vastness of the hurt in the world, the enormity is too enormous. And so in order to be able to work on the things that I feel are critical, I have to be able to do them in small ways. It's kind of the only path which I can keep momentum on, I feel like. And hopefully those tie into larger stories in a way that's legible. But that was it. Yeah, thanks.
Anyone else want to respond to that question?
I could. Gosh, there's a lot to say about that question. It's like it's the we put this idea of like refuting the a return to normal or the old normal up on a chalkboard out in front of our house recently, trying to just start conversations in our neighborhood. And I guess the first thing, and I think maybe the most important thing to this conversation to highlight, I don't really care about the art part of that question, but this idea of how this a refusal of returning to the old normal functions rhetorically as a demand, I think is very interesting. And I guess I would just relate it rhetorically, conceptually to kind of what Krista was referring to, of that the end of the world has happened many times, that's been disproportionately visited on through colonialism and genocide and race slavery, and that you see, I think, the same rhetorical move articulated through racial justice struggles and Black Lives Matter, through this through pointing out that the images of racial injustice may appear shocking. If the frame is sort of a white mediated news media, then this image of state violence against Black bodies is sort of shocking and new. But if the frame is the perspective of Black lives which matter, then there's nothing new about about that state violence, and there's nothing new about the end of the world. So I think similarly, this demand of like the normal to which people say they want to return is unacceptable. Is a form of ongoing death and genocide. Is I think it importantly changes, it decenters my experience and potentially centers some really important other kinds of experiences.
I just have a few sort of maybe not so well connected thoughts about this question of crisis and the problem of crisis and opportunity, and crisis as a kind of moment where you can say that there are new narratives generated, right? Or there are moments for new kinds of thinking. But at the same time, there's always an opportunity for like a rightward turn, like what's being done under the guise of the pandemic. So I think that there's a kind of way that narratives can be returned. I'm thinking about fan fiction, for example, like in terms of speculation and the kind of flourishing that can happen in terms of rewriting narratives, the way that art functions, and that the way that there's a kind of potential that everyone has to retake stories and retell them and rewrite them, and those can turn into other kinds of things. But it's also quite complex in terms of what those political turns mean. I think about, rather than kind of the long historical view of older and more recent genocides, I'm even thinking about events like the Christchurch earthquake, where there were plans to rebuild a green city. And having been there because my partner's from there, right now there's a lot of parking lots. And so I think that the question is then what can happen, how to go against these kind of entrenched, rightward political terms in these moments of crisis, which are also their opportunities to hijack them, but also set against this kind of moment where there can be these kind of narrative openings and also political and social change. That's it. Oh, that's all I have to say. Hello?
Hi. Yeah, I'm just leaving some time in case anyone wants to jump in to respond.
Can I add a further thought, which is problematic to that, which is really about beavers and flourishing? And, I think it's maybe not to make light of, but I also think about the kind of flourishing of COVID. I'm thinking about where life came from in the vents and the sea, and how at the deep hydrothermal vents, like what these kind of conditions are, and thinking about viruses which don't need to eat and they don't reproduce. And, would it be a good world if it's a world for COVID, and COVID, it's a COVID world. So I'm just thinking about, the kind of moral quality if an oak tree is just there to reproduce acorns, anyway.
May I respond a little bit? Only to say that there's a lot of evidence that suggests, biologically speaking, that way back, viruses were very, very important to the formation of human beings themselves.
Certainly.
And you know what I mean? And so they're part of every day. And the fact that they are growing more dangerous for us is the fact that we have made their environment less dangerous for them. That is to say, we've disrupted everything.
I'm just trying to bring to fore this kind of, the broader set of questions about, what life is valuable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a half an hour left. Whitney, maybe there's questions that you'd like to highlight coming from the audience that we could direct toward artists?
Sure, TJ. We have a couple of questions that came in earlier in the conversation. And I'll go ahead and just read these questions, and whichever ones kind of stand out for folks, the panelists can go ahead and answer. But the first question that was asked very, very early on in the conversation was, how will art and society be shaped by virtual and augmented reality experiences? So that was one question. And then the second question that came up during the conversation was also, can you share your personal ideas around legacy, your hopes, history, and artwork, and how it will be carried into the future by collaborative partners? So those are the first two questions, virtual and augmented reality, and then also legacy, if anyone wants to talk on either of those things. And I'll post those two in the chat as well. And then there's a few more questions I can follow up with later.
May I say something about legacy? Helen and I, early on, when we started our collaboration back in 1970, decided that our legacy should disappear. And that the bigger we worked, the more important it was for others to take stuff from us, and the more important it was for us to disappear. I have no interest in legacy whatsoever.
I presented the question on AR and VR, and I'll make some wild claims here, but I think when language was invented, it created an augmented reality. It created a way of perceiving that may be connected to reality and maybe not. But the very fact that I can view all of you in your living room and is a very leveling kind of experience. And I think it is part of a virtual reality that is pretty stunning, actually. And when you think about how we're able to see newscasters and the people that they're interviewing in their homes is a profound effect, in my view. And I think that it's as a, I can't call myself an artist, but I have been involved in digital media for decades now. And the kinds of things I'm seeing are really interesting. In a simple way, I've been playing around, well, how do children understand this perspective? And how there is a little application that's called My Talking Pet. But I fused that with some of the 3D Google animals such that I was able to create a view of the child's dog or cat. And then I asked the child, well, record your voice so that your dog or cat can speak. And what would you say on its behalf? And so how do we speak on behalf of nature in a way that isn't clouded with our own human obsessions?
Thank you, David. Do you want to give the panelists an opportunity to answer that question? So the question was, just kind of going back, how do you believe the world will be shaped or changed by virtual or augmented reality in the context of this conversation in our current moment?
I think one thing I'd point to is what Naomi Klein recently articulated as the Screen New Deal, and how Silicon Valley and tech corporations are completely using the crisis to push through basically the Zoomification or the virtualization of everything as an economic opportunity. So this is a big question politically, how we might respond, how artists will respond. Because I think what we're seeing here is, even though it is amazing that we can all connect like this across geographies and time zones, we are missing the fundamental embodied sensuous experience of being in a gallery and seeing work in person, which is really irreplaceable. So maybe at the same time we're faced with the emphasis on AR and VR and virtualization, a new appreciation for physical, embodied, in real life experience. Maybe there's some other questions as well, unless anyone wants to jump in there.
I do. I want to say something about that. I just want to bring up this artist, Skawanetti. They're Canadian media artist, and there's this series online that you can watch about this Mohawk man in the future, Hunter, who has a pair of glasses that he can go into the past and time travel. And I think it's really an interesting conversation, an interesting time. You know, I mean, my degree is in ethnic studies, so, you know, we read Kindred, we read Octavia Butler, we talk about Afrofuturism. So I'm really familiar with, you know, I mean, Futures Haunt Qollective, right? We, you know, that's our game, it's our gig. It's what we're interested in. But as an Indigenous person, you know, we have to project ourselves into a future all the time. That is unknown. And when we talk about what the future of art is and a legacy, it's for me dreaming and being a future ghost is going to be my legacy. And so I guess that the whole kind of point is that right now a lot of us are just trying to live, like for real, like just trying to live. And for me, being in an art collective has helped me live. And so that's how important it is. It's everything, you know? And so I don't think it's a trivial question. I think that if somebody asks you to be in an art collective, you should say yes.
Me too, Angie. Me too. Always say yes.
I have to say one thing here. Helen and I always practiced yes too, because we thought we would never get another work. So whatever anybody asked, we said yes to. Now I'm 87 and over yes and don't know what to do with yes anymore.
You can say no. No is okay too. No is also very appropriate. Yeah, when you need to say no, just say no, you know, because we all have a limited amount of resources, even in our own selves, right? That we also have to harvest and we also have to hold dear, right? And treasure and cherish and cultivate. So yeah, sometimes no is a part of that. You know, that really true love of what you're offering.
My synapses are still wrong for it. What can I say? You're right, but what can I say?
Hey.
Whitney, what about a couple more questions?
Yeah, we have another question or statement prompt, and this is from Blaze. And this is also talking about access and screen time. And Blaze's question or statement is, the amazing, irritating thing is that how all of these are all things that disabled people have been wanting for years. We were told that it was not possible. Working from home, taking part in events while public wasn't able to leave the house, etc. So talking about how this present moment and accessibility plays into screen time, creating work for multiple platforms and multiple experiences.
You know, we're in a unique spot right now where things, you know, that how can I describe it? Things that have been right in plain sight and plain view the entire time are suddenly very, very clear, you know, or coming into focus. So yes, I understand the frustration that Blaze is talking about here, that suddenly everybody wants to understand what you've been saying for 2,000 years. Well, that's where we are. And so those of us who've been playing this game for a really long time, we just have to kind of sit in this frustration and let it flow, you know, as people catch up. It's just a process. It's a process. But yes, absolutely. Those who have been disenfranchised, disabled, who have not had access, you know, over extended periods of time, this is the time where people are like, oh, That's not comfortable. Nope, it's not. It's not comfortable at all. And how are you can we expand our understandings of how we're gonna move through this world together, thinking about all of us, everyone. So yeah, I would like to just circle back very quickly though and talk about legacy. Everything that I have been doing over these past, 20 plus years at this point that I've been in this game has been about legacy. Because legacy is about, right, it's connected to some degree to inheritance, right? What we leave behind for people, right? What are we leaving behind for the people that come after us, right? And so my whole life has been about, because people have left treasure trails for me to follow, to survive, to figure out what's out here, right? To figure out how to navigate this world that's extremely cruel, right? And relentless, I have had to follow the breadcrumb trails of many of the legacies that have been left behind for me. Sometimes people's legacies that they leave behind are not really all that good. Everybody's leaving a legacy, to be honest. Everybody who's in this room right now, you are leaving a legacy. What you have to ask yourself at some point is, what legacy are you leaving behind? Some of us are leaving behind legacies of terror and awfulness and disgusting behavior. Figure it out. It's all, again, that's up to people to decide on their own time. But my legacy is about leaving something that people can use when I'm out of here,
Federico, what do you think about legacy and futurity?
Sort of going back to the question that Whitney posed, it is pretty evident that this pandemic really lays out all these very disproportionate privileged ways that we all have kind of normalized, right? And also the many injustices that this pandemic has uncovered for us to see more clearly, as Krista was saying. Ironically, it functions, the pandemic, in my opinion, functions the same way capitalism functions, right? That for some, it's actually a good lifestyle, and for the privileged, it's pretty good. And for the disadvantaged, it's twice as hard to live through and to cope with, right? And so even the very action of questioning this is a privilege, right? To have the education, for those of us that are in this panel or here listening and are able to gather these thoughts because we had the privilege of having an education, it's already that itself that we also must acknowledge, and how a lot of people who don't have the privilege to work from home, to even question, right, do I have to go to work? It's honestly come down to a mode of survival, as we've seen in India and South America, and in some parts of this country, honestly, right? And that itself, I find it astonishing how this pandemic sort of aligns with the same problems as capitalism has.
So do I.
Are there more audience questions? It's maybe Whitney, you've been following the chat.
Yeah, so in the chat, we've got, let's see, those were most of the questions. There's been a lot of comments. So if folks have like a specific question for the panelists, if you'd like to go ahead and either put that question in the chat box, if you'd like us to read it for you, or if you want to take a moment to ask that question yourself.
I noticed that Micha has been writing some stuff. I haven't been able to follow both at the same time, but maybe Micha, you could pose it as a question or a comment.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I tried to pose it as a question. I wonder if the panelists could speak to the way that human and non-human is a binary, is a false binary, and that women, indigenous people, Black people, queer and trans people have been defined outside of that binary for centuries. That's really, I would say, what even the purpose of the definition of human was really to define who's expendable and who's killable. So I think that, you know, having a man yell at me is always an unpleasant experience. But this yelling of people, people, people seems to me to really, really emphasize and just reinstate the exceptionalism of humans. It's just not true. Humans are not exceptional. So saying like, all we have to do is just focus on the non-humans, seems like an oversimplification. And I'd love to hear from the other panelists about their thoughts about that, like the feeling of being deemed non-human and having to respond to that. Yeah.
I think that's a great question. Thank you, Micha, for that. I think, you know, it's pretty clear that we're going through a time right now where we have to question ourselves and start redefining what human means for us, right? Apparently, it seems like those in prison are not human enough under this pandemic. It seems like migrants, especially children in detention centers, are not human enough to be provided enough adequate spaces, right? It seems pretty evident that a lot of these communities and peoples that have historically been displaced, oppressed, and abused are not human enough under any crisis, and not just this pandemic, right? So I think this crisis, this pandemic, just sort of reinforces this questioning of how do we collectively define ourselves and as a species, right?
Anyone else want to respond to Micha's?
You know, I have one small one. My people position, hostility, you could say, as it shows up here and there, is based upon how much money is given to the well-being of people and how much to the well-being, it's an energetic question and a biological one, to the well-being of the great life web that is under such assault by all of us. And so what I see is I got it from the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation. I was having an argument with them about just this. They stopped talking to me, I must say, and for good reason. And that was what told me. They did an examination and they found that 93% of all monies was given to refugees and the like, deserving folk, but only 4 or 5% was given to the life web, which was dying. And so I thought there's a weird inequity in energy here, because lots of the problems, all our problems, we create with each other. Prejudice is a stupid human invention, and they continue on and on. And so that was the basis of my people thing. That is too much energy, too much attention was going to one group when a whole other system was so endangered. And that system is from which we spring, and that's what feeds us. So that's what it was. You're welcome to be as critical of me as you wish, Mika, but that's what I was meaning.
You know, one thing I just want to add, which is a conjecture, which is that, you know, the histories of environmentalism in the United States and history of environmental justice, obviously they spring from different roots, and they have different focuses, and they also have different legacies. And, you know, I think this question about what the future holds, like what's possible at this moment, is, for me, I would hope that there will be some kind of capacity for these movements, including their different needful priorities, can work together in some kind of united front, because obviously they're disentangleable questions that need the kind of the proper funding and the kind of proper focus that hopefully will be able to give the kind of support and attention so that there can be a flourishing where so much and so many are being made killable.
I think for me, I'd make a related point, which is that there's a growing massification of financial resources that are being directed toward large-scale global technological solutions to climate disaster. And there's even some arguments increasingly arguing that that forms of democracy, deliberation, community participation, all that stuff is getting in the way of the limited time that we have to solve these global catastrophic problems. And so maybe we need to just bypass them, bypass people and forms of global climate governance entirely, and simply let technologists like people practicing geoengineering in large-scale corporations, research universities, and nations, for instance, like China, do their thing, so that we don't need to think about this and we can just solve the immediate urgency of climate disaster. And while that might seem logical, I think the big worry there is that it's a kind of ultimately a kind of logic of exterminism, where large scale populations are simply rendered irrelevant. And ultimately it's not, I think we have to question the logic of solutionism, because ultimately it's not really, I think, sincerely attempting to solve any problems. It's simply a form of wealth accumulation for already very wealthy CEOs and venture capitalist investors, who have shown, for instance, within the fossil fuel industry, that they're more than willing to prioritize short-term profits over long-term well-being of people or the wider web of life. And so I think, for me, there's just politically, there's no way out of thinking geotechnology and forms of climate solutions together with the necessity of democratization coming from a climate justice-based perspective that brings in those who have suffered the most historically to the table to make the decisions about what kind of ways forward we consider and implement. There's just simply no way around it. Or else we risk a kind of eco-fascism, where environmental concerns are basically used to just increase the already unbelievable, grotesque economic and social political inequality that we're living with today. So I suppose this is coming back to Newton's point. How can we possibly foreground technological or large-scale global solutions without falling into the trap of a kind of dangerous techno-determinism that ends up sacrificing people, where it becomes a potential genocidal or exterminist project?
I think there's a piece in this that we're skirting around, which is this key term that gets deployed. Like, I hear Newton as being critical, I think, of a lot of the same kinds of extraction that we all are, and yet the way that he has framed the subject of that is this idea of a we, and I don't know that there has been a we to this point, right? So when we see that play out politically, what that means is that if we say that we are the problem, then that includes basically all humanity, and yet all humanity as a subject has yet to come into being as really like a shared subjectivity, right? And that's the key thing at this moment, because there is the possibility due to the precarity, the vulnerability of each human life to the coronavirus, of there being a shared conception of humanity, but it hasn't been, thus far in this pandemic, that hasn't been how it's played out. And that's why we see, disproportionate impacts on communities of color, on working class people, on people in detention camps, on people in prisons, right? In a sort of broadly intersectional way. So I think that the thing is, and speaking really directly to Newton, I think you're right that at a species level, we need to grapple with that, but the we that needs to come into being doesn't exist yet. The we that needs to be held accountable for this to this moment is, really capitalists in the global north. And until we have a really species-wide subjectivity, it's really inappropriate for us to conceptualize there being a sort of we that can be held responsible.
I think that, just quickly, I think that points to the significance of Laurie's contribution in setting up a table, right, which invites people to come and discuss. This is a microcosmic version of what needs to happen in terms of global climate governance. We need to invite everyone, or the most disenfranchised and excluded stakeholders to the table to make the decisions about what kind of future can be livable.
I speak a little to that. I was thinking, in response to what Misha raised, that I feel very much aligned with what she was saying about the human, non-human not being, that's a false binary. And I feel like, trying to imagine overcoming these centuries of humanistic philosophy of a kind of deep racism that's embedded in that, as well as this, private property capitalism that is coming out of that. Trying to get over that, I feel like we're all trying to do that, and it's very hard, and it's very abstract. And then it brings me back to this wonderful point of, the collectivities that many of us have here tried to generate and are generating, and that's where we work. That's a level of working that is, I think, really, really exciting and, can be joyful, even as it's full of all of the pain that we're also, feeling coming in from the universe. And I just wanted to bring it into, at least for my own practice, I feel like there's this realm of trying to think through these really, really hard questions and reconceptualize, the whole history of humankind and the earth. And at the same time, working with the people that you meet and love and find connections with and can actually tussle with, like we're tussling here too, which feels so valuable and so interesting and important right now.
I really just want to encourage everyone. I'm getting ready to bounce out of this room. I'm so sorry to have to leave a little earlier than others, but I just wanted to kind of leave a final thought. Just, theory is one thing, practice is another, right? So it's like just really getting ourselves into practice mode a little bit more, being grounded in our bodies and getting ourselves together on this, what we're dealing with face to face with each other, one-to-one experiences, how can we just really move out of these theoretical conceptual spaces into actual reality, rooted, grounded reality, of people's real lived experiences right now, and also from the past, right? Because that kind of gives us the blueprint for how we move forward, right? The other thing I kind of want to say too is staying present also allows us to engage in things, to invent as we go, right? To be more improvisational in our approach, right? What's the crisis situation at this moment, and how can we effectively respond to that in a way that's not like this panic driven, like, oh my God, here we are. How do we fix all of this? No, just one-to-one, gradual, grounded. I just kind of want to encourage us to stay in that mode, right? Because I do think the sensual thing is being lost, TJ, and that's something that I have to deal with in my own little personal life, right? I have to find out where I'm going to get those kinds of experiences that I was getting in other ways before, right? In the other world, what I'm calling the old world now. It's fine. It's okay. It's always a new world forming everywhere, all the time. Every spring it happens. It's just happening to us this spring. So anyway, I just wanted to, decay, death, growth, right? You know, fertilization, bye to the old, hello to the new. You know, it happens all the time. It's a part of nature. So now we're just involved in it, you know? Mother Nature said, hey, you guys are in this game too, so here you go. So you guys have I just want to say thank you again, TJ. Thank you so, so much. And just for the rich, rich conversation, you know, today. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Krista. I'm just reminded again by Octavia Butler, right? God is change. The struggle continues. So I think we're gonna, it's about 12 o'clock, so we want to wrap it up now. So I just want to invite anyone who would like to make a final comment about the discussion to help conclude, and then we'll say goodbye. So before we do, I'd like to thank all the participants. Thank you, Whitney, for setting this up. It's been a really amazing conversation. Again, I wish we could spend time in real life. So any final thoughts from anyone? Newton?
It's really not to do with the conversation, but if and when we're able to, you know, be in one place together again. I know that the Rasquache Collective is looking to take all our kites off of the ceiling in the MA there, and have a big, you know, glorious procession to the beach and fly those kites. And I'm really looking forward to the possibility of that moment. So welcome folks to join.
Yeah, Newton, you have to unmute yourself.
There's a great ecologist. Can you unmute? Oh, I'm on mute. There's a great ecologist named Ranil Senanayaka. I know him from a student. I got him into scripts and through oceanography. He became the leader of all NGOs in Africa, to give an example. So Ranil, I asked, we talk to each other often. What are you doing now? Well, I'm in the mountains in Peru. What are you doing in the mountains in Peru? I'm working with poor villages. Why are you doing that? There are a lot of them around. He said, I'm doing that because they have the greatest adaptive abilities when they face climate change of anybody, and they can deal with it. And I'm working with them in that way because I think we're into gigantic global collapse, and I'm helping the folk I think will do best. That's all I have to say.
Thanks so much, Newton. Any other final thoughts? All right, I suppose I'll pass it over to Whitney, who maybe would like to say the final conclusion. But thanks again from my end, and I hope we can continue the conversation in the future. I'm sure we will.
Yeah, thank you, TJ, and thank you so much to all the artists who were able to join us today, and for everyone who carved out some time in their day to talk about all of these really incredible themes. So as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the exhibition will be extended. We're looking to extend the exhibition at the MA into September. And so we will have that information updated on our website. And also for, if you want to revisit this conversation at any point, it has been recorded. So we will be posting a link to that on the exhibition website page. And I've put a link to that in the chat as well. Yeah, thank you so much for all this rich conversation. If folks have follow-up questions, feel free to contact me at the MA. And we look forward to seeing you at some point in the future in person when it is safe and just to do so. And right now at the MA, we're looking at that possibility happening sometime in the late summer. But if you want more information, go ahead and join our mailing list or follow us on social media to get those updates. Thank you again so much to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. This is lovely.
Bye, everyone. Take care.